Welcome to my channel. Please support my channel with subscribe, like and share. Thank you. The rain had just started when Emma Blake pulled into the long stretch of the airport road. The sky above Boston was a dull gray, and her heart felt about the same. She wasn't used to traveling with company, especially not him. Sitting quietly in the passenger seat, Ethan, her 19-year-old stepson, scrolled through his phone, headphones in, lost somewhere between music and silence. It had only been 2 years since Emma had married his father, Mark, but lately, Mark had been traveling so much that the house barely felt like a home. When Emma's company suddenly asked her to attend a conference in Seattle, Mark suggested Ethan go with her. You two could use some time together, he'd said. Emma had smiled politely. Inside, she wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Ethan barely spoke to her beyond the occasional hey. But she didn't want to refuse. Maybe this trip could change something. The flight was quiet. Ethan kept his headphones on. Emma read through her presentation notes. She was nervous. This deal could make or break her career. Still, every now and then, she caught herself glancing at Ethan. His calmness, the way he observed people, reminded her of someone older than his years. There was a quiet depth to him, one that made her wonder what he was really thinking. When they landed in Seattle, the air felt fresh, cold, and full of promise. The hotel lobby was warm and modern, with soft piano music and the smell of coffee floating through the air. They checked in 2 rooms next to each other, but when they got upstairs, a problem appeared. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry," the front desk clerk had said, breathless as she caught up to them. "Your reservation system glitched. We only have 1 room available right now. The second one will be ready by tomorrow morning." Ethan looked at Emma awkwardly. She blinked, trying to process it. "1 room, 1 night, that's fine," she said finally, keeping her tone light. "We'll manage." Inside, she was embarrassed. She didn't want things to feel uncomfortable, but Ethan was calm. "It's okay," he said gently. "I can take the couch." That small kindness surprised her. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ethan." That night, as rain tapped softly against the hotel window, Emma sat at the desk, laptop open, preparing for her morning meeting. Ethan had changed into a hoodie and was watching a movie quietly on the couch. After a while, he spoke. "Do you ever get tired of it?" She looked up. "Of what?" "Working so much," he said, his eyes still on the screen. "Dad says you never stop." She chuckled softly. "That sounds like Mark." "Yeah," he said, smiling slightly. "He also said you're the reason he started believing in second chances." Emma froze for a second. Those words, second chances, hit something deep inside her. She had built her life after losing a lot. A failed marriage. Years of trying to be enough, and learning to start again. She didn't know Ethan had noticed. "You two talk about me?" she asked, curious. "Sometimes," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "I think he really loves you, but I think he forgets you need him to." There was silence. Emma looked at the window, where the city lights blurred through the rain. Something about Ethan's honesty caught her off guard, not because it was bold, but because it was true. She sighed softly. "You're more observant than I thought." "I notice things," he said quietly, "especially when people stop saying what they really feel." Later that night, Emma finished her work and turned off the laptop. She found Ethan asleep on the couch, a blanket half on, his arm hanging off the side. He looked peaceful, almost childlike, and yet, not a child anymore. She smiled and covered him properly with the blanket. As she turned to go to bed, she caught her reflection in the window. A tired woman with soft eyes and a heart that didn't know what to do with its quiet ache. It wasn't love. Not the kind she once knew, but it was something, the feeling of being seen, even for a moment. The next morning, the hotel room felt different. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting the air gold. Emma got ready in her navy suit, her nerves high. She had to present to a board of executives in 2 hours. As she reached for her briefcase, Ethan stood up. "You'll do great," he said simply. She smiled nervously. "You sound confident." "I am," he said. "You don't see yourself the way others do. You make people feel safe. That's why you'll win them over." Her breath caught for a moment. No one had ever said that to her. Not even Mark. For a heartbeat. They just stood there, 2 people who had entered each other's lives by chance. Now caught in an unexpected moment of understanding. Then Ethan smiled and picked up his jacket. "Let's get breakfast before you change the world." Emma laughed, the tension breaking. But as they walked out of the room, something inside her whispered that this trip, this simple, ordinary business trip, was going to change everything. The restaurant downstairs was filled with the soft murmur of morning chatter, the sound of coffee cups clinking, and the smell of warm cinnamon rolls. Emma and Ethan sat by the window, overlooking the Seattle skyline wrapped in a pale fog dot. Emma sipped her coffee, still trying to calm her nerves. Her presentation was in less than an hour. "You're awfully calm for someone traveling with me," she said with a teasing smile. Ethan grinned. "I've learned from you already, pretend everything's fine until it actually is." That made her laugh, and for a second, she forgot about her presentation. She hadn't laughed like that in months. Not the polite kind, but the real kind that makes your chest feel lighter. After breakfast, she went to the conference hall, while Ethan explored the nearby streets. Before leaving, he said, "You'll do great. Text me when it's done." "Okay." There was a warmth in his voice, genuine, unfiltered. The presentation went better than Emma could have imagined. Her voice was steady, her ideas clear. The clients nodded, impressed. When she finished, applause filled the room. As she walked out, she saw a message from Ethan. "How did it go? Should I order something to celebrate?" She smiled, her heart softening. When she returned to the hotel that evening, the room smelled faintly of takeout and coffee. Ethan had set up the small table with 2 plates and takeout boxes neatly arranged. "Dinner's ready, Miss CEO," he said jokingly. She laughed, dropping her bag on the bed. "You really did this?" "Of course. You deserve it," he said, handing her a cup of hot tea. "You always take care of everyone else. Someone should take care of you for once." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten, not from discomfort, but from surprise. Nobody had spoken to her like that in a long time. They talked for hours that night, not about business, not about family, just life. Ethan told her about college, how he'd dropped out for a semester because he wasn't sure what he wanted. She shared how she'd built her career from scratch after her first marriage failed. "I used to think success would fill the empty spaces," she said softly, "but sometimes, the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets." Ethan listened quietly, his gaze gentle. "You don't seem lonely to me," he said. "You just seem guarded, like you've had to be strong for too long." Those words stayed with her long after they stopped talking. Later that night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled against the windows, and thunder echoed through the city. Emma tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the conversation. At around midnight, she heard a knock. Ethan stood at the door, hair slightly messy, wearing a t-shirt. "Sorry," he said, looking sheepish. "The thunder's too loud. I can't sleep." She smiled softly. "Come in. I can't sleep either." They sat by the window, watching lightning flash over the dark skyline. For a while, they said nothing. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "You know, when Dad told me to come on this trip, I thought it'd be awkward. But it's not." "Me too," she admitted. "I thought we'd spend the whole time avoiding each other." He smiled faintly. "I think sometimes people avoid connection because they're afraid of how much it might mean." Emma turned to look at him, surprised by the depth of his words. Outside, the rain softened. The city lights glowed like stars scattered across the wet streets. In that moment, Emma realized that this trip wasn't just about work. It was about seeing things and people she had overlooked, especially one person sitting right beside her, who reminded her that being understood was sometimes more powerful than being loved. When morning came, the sun broke through the clouds. Ethan was already awake, sitting on the couch, sketching in his notebook. "You draw?" she asked, still half asleep. He nodded. "It helps me think. I was sketching the view." She looked at his drawing, the Seattle skyline, soft lines, gentle shading, and there, in the corner of the page, was her standing by the window, looking out. Her breath caught. "You drew me?" she asked, a bit stunned. He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I draw what I notice." Emma couldn't find words. She just smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but this small, quiet moment would stay with her far longer than the success of her presentation, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a businesswoman or a stepmother trying too hard. She just felt seen. The next day began with sunshine spilling across the hotel curtains, turning the room a soft golden hue. Emma stretched, feeling more rested than she had in months. Something about this trip had changed her rhythm slower, calmer, warmer. Ethan was already up, packing his small bag for a walk around Pike Place Market. "You've got a few hours before your next meeting, right?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, tying her hair into a loose bun. "I thought I'd spend them going over notes." He gave her a playful look. "Or you could come with me instead. You've seen enough conference rooms for one lifetime." Emma hesitated. She was usually the responsible one, always planning, always focused. But the thought of fresh air, coffee, and maybe laughter, it was tempting. "All right," she said, smiling. "Lead the way." They spent the morning walking through Seattle's streets, vendors calling out, the smell of roasted coffee drifting through the air, the sound of musicians playing soft guitar melodies. Emma hadn't realized how much she'd missed the feeling of being alive, of simply being part of the world rather than rushing through it. At one point, Ethan stopped at a small flower stall. He picked up a white tulip and handed it to her. "For you," he said lightly. "You look like the kind of person who'd love simple things." She laughed softly, touched by the gesture. "You're surprisingly thoughtful for someone who acts so mysterious." He smiled but didn't answer, just walked beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. They found a quiet cafe by the waterfront and sat near the window. The conversation came easily, almost too easily. She told him about her first big job, how scared she'd been. He told her about his plans to go back to college and study architecture. "You'd be great at that," she said sincerely. "You see the world in a way most people don't." Ethan looked at her for a moment, his voice softer now. "Maybe that's because I've been watching people like you, people who build their own lives from nothing." Her heart tightened again, the way it had the night before. There was something in his words, not romantic exactly, but deeply personal. Like he saw her in a way she hadn't seen herself in years. That evening, after a long day of meetings, Emma returned to the hotel room. Ethan was sitting by the window again, sketchbook in hand, just like before. He looked up when she entered. "How'd it go?" She smiled tiredly. "Better than expected. We closed the deal." "That's amazing," he said, genuinely proud. She set her bag down and poured herself a glass of water. "I couldn't have done it without your pep talk yesterday. You know that, right?" He chuckled. "So I'm your secret weapon now." "Maybe you are," she said with a playful smirk. For a moment, their eyes met, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm. Safe. Later that night, Emma stood by the window again, looking out at the city lights. Seattle glittered like a blanket of stars reflected in the water. Ethan walked up quietly beside her. "You're thinking about going home already, aren't you?" She smiled faintly. "You read minds now." He shook his head. "No. I just notice when you're somewhere else." She sighed. "It's hard not to be. Home means responsibility. Deadlines. A husband who's always away." Ethan didn't say anything for a while. Then softly, he said, "You deserve more than just being someone's second priority." Her chest ached at his words, not because of him, but because of the truth in them. She had spent years giving, waiting, hoping to be seen, and now, in the quiet company of someone who is never supposed to matter this much, she finally felt understood. The next morning, they were supposed to fly home. Emma packed slowly, glancing now and then at Ethan. He was quiet, more than usual. "Something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, just not ready to leave, I guess." "Me neither," she admitted, when they reached the airport. The air between them was different, heavier, filled with something unsaid. At the gate, Ethan turned to her and said, "You know, I'm really glad I came. This trip, it meant more than you know." Emma looked at him, her heart caught between gratitude and confusion. "It meant a lot to me too, Ethan." He smiled softly. "Maybe someday, you'll tell me what it really meant." Before she could reply, the announcement for boarding echoed through the airport. And just like that, the moment passed, leaving behind a silence full of questions. Neither of them dared to ask. When the plane lifted into the clouds, Emma looked out the window, her reflection shimmering against the glass. She realized she wasn't just returning from a business trip. She was leaving a piece of her heart behind in Seattle. And something told her, this story wasn't over yet. Back in Boston, the familiar sound of rain on the driveway welcomed them home, but this time, it didn't feel comforting. The house felt quieter, almost distant, as if something had changed in the air. Mark was still away on another trip, as usual. He'd left a short message that morning. "Hope the conference went well. Tell Ethan I'll call when I land." No warmth, no curiosity, just words, practical and detached. Emma placed her suitcase by the door and exhaled. Ethan set his down beside hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Well," she said finally, forcing a small smile, "home sweet home." "Yeah," Ethan replied softly, though it didn't sound like agreement. Over the next few days, life returned to its routine rhythm, or tried to. Emma went back to the office, long meetings and cold coffee becoming her constant companions again, but she found her thoughts wandering to quiet breakfasts, late-night talks, and the way Ethan had seen her, not as Mark's wife, but as herself. And Ethan, he was different too, more thoughtful, quieter, almost like he was holding something back. He'd started spending more time in the garage, sketching for hours. One evening, she walked in to find one of his sketches left on the table, a drawing of the Seattle skyline again. But this time, she wasn't looking out the window. She was smiling, facing the light. Something about that image broke her heart a little. That weekend, Mark finally returned. The sound of his suitcase wheels echoed down the hallway. He kissed her on the cheek, distracted, and said, "You look tired. Long week." Emma forced a polite smile. "Just busy." He nodded absently, already scrolling through his phone. "You and Ethan got along fine, right?" She hesitated. "Yes, we did." "That's good," he said, barely looking up. "I was worried you two might not have much to talk about." If only he knew. She wanted to tell him that his son had been the only one to ask how she really felt in months. That she had laughed, shared, and remembered what it meant to feel alive, all things she hadn't done with her husband in years. But she said nothing. Some truths were too fragile to survive being spoken aloud. The next few days passed like slow rain. Ethan and Emma barely crossed paths, though both felt the same unspoken pull, that quiet awareness of something that had changed, but could never quite be named. Then one evening, as Emma prepared dinner, Ethan came into the kitchen. The soft hum of the oven filled the silence. "I've been thinking about going back to Seattle," he said finally. She looked up, startled. "For school?" "Yeah, I found an architecture program there that feels right." Emma smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. "That's wonderful, Ethan, I'm proud of you." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, that trip changed how I see things. Not just the city, you too." She froze, her heart suddenly unsteady. "Ethan." He stepped closer, his voice still calm. "Careful, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, not as a title or a role, but as you." For a long moment, there was silence, just the soft hum of the oven and the faint rhythm of rain against the window. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emma stood by her window again, just as she had in Seattle. The moonlight reflected softly on the glass, and she caught her own reflection, the same woman, yet somehow different. She realized that what shocked her wasn't Ethan's words. It wasn't even the connection they had found. What truly shocked her was how much she had needed someone to remind her that she was still capable of being seen, felt, and understood, and though nothing inappropriate had ever happened between them, their bond had changed something deep inside her, something she couldn't unfeel. The next morning, she found a note on the kitchen table in Ethan's handwriting. "I got my acceptance letter. Leaving next week. Thank you for everything, Emma. I'll never forget that trip, not because of Seattle, but because of you." Her eyes stung as she read it. There were no grand gestures, no promises, just truth, quiet and unspoken. She folded the note carefully and placed it inside her journal, right beside her business cards. Two sides of her life that finally made sense together. As she stepped outside to watch the morning light rise over the neighborhood, she smiled through the ache in her chest. Sometimes, life's most powerful moments aren't about love stories or confessions. They're about finding the one person who helps you remember who you are, even if they're not meant to stay. And in that quiet realization, Emma finally understood what the trip had given her, a chance to feel alive again. A week passed quietly. The house felt emptier than usual, though nobody said it out loud. Ethan's flight to Seattle was early Monday morning. Emma tried to stay composed, but every time she walked past the living room or saw his sketches lying around, her heart tugged. Mark didn't notice much. He was busy packing for yet another trip. "Don't be sad," he told her absent-mindedly as he buttoned his shirt. "He'll be fine. You know Ethan, he always figures things out." Emma just nodded. "Yes, he does." But that wasn't what made her emotional. What she felt was harder to name. It wasn't loss. Exactly. It was the quiet gratitude of having shared something fleeting but meaningful. On the morning of Ethan's departure, the air was still, the sky tinted with a pale gray dawn. Emma offered to drive him to the airport, and he accepted without hesitation. The ride was mostly silent. The roads were empty, the city still half asleep. Occasionally, a streetlight reflected across Ethan's face, and she could see the thoughtful calm that had always made him seem older than his years. When they finally reached the terminal, she parked the car but didn't turn off the engine. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ethan said softly, "I don't really know how to say goodbye." She smiled gently. "Then don't. Just say see you later." He looked at her, his voice low and steady. "See you later, then." She wanted to say more, to tell him how proud she was, how much his presence had unexpectedly healed something inside her, but her throat tightened. So instead, she reached over and touched his hand, just briefly. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." He nodded. "I will. And you, don't forget to live. Okay." The simplicity of those words hit deeper than he knew. Then he stepped out of the car, slinging his bag over his shoulder. She watched him disappear into the crowd of travelers, swallowed by the noise of airport doors sliding open. And just like that, he was gone. That evening, the house felt quiet again. The same walls, the same furniture, but something in her heart had shifted. She opened her laptop, intending to work, but her eyes caught the sketch Ethan had left behind, pinned near her desk. It was the two of them sitting by the hotel window, watching the rain fall over Seattle. There was no title, no words, just the warmth of a moment frozen in pencil and paper. She smiled through the tears that gently filled her eyes. For years, she had chased success, approval, and stability, but Ethan, in his quiet way, had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that life isn't only about being strong, but also about being seen, and that sometimes, the most unexpected person can become the mirror that reflects you back to yourself. Months passed. Emma's company offered her a promotion, one that would allow her to lead new projects in the Pacific Northwest. When she saw the city listed on the paperwork, she smiled. Seattle, it felt like a full circle. When she landed there again, the same scent of rain and coffee filled the air. She walked through the same streets, the market, the waterfront, even the little cafe where she and Ethan had once sat talking about dreams. The barista smiled. "First time here." Emma shook her head softly. "No, but it feels like it again." Later that evening, she stood by her hotel window, a new one, higher floor, same skyline. The city lights shimmered, and in the distance, she could almost imagine the sound of a younger voice saying, "You make people feel safe." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. Maybe one day, she would see Ethan again, maybe not, but either way, what mattered was that their story, brief as it was, had left a permanent mark on her life. Because sometimes the most surprising connections don't last forever. They just change us enough that nothing feels the same again. As the rain began to fall softly outside, Emma whispered to the window, her reflection shimmering against the city lights, "Thank you, Ethan." And with that, she turned off the lamp, closed her laptop, and finally allowed herself to rest, not as a businesswoman, not as a wife, but as a woman who had finally remembered how to feel. The end.